goosebumps every time, yeah, 713. The 281, yeah, I'm riding. Why they on me? Why they on me? I'm flying, sipping low key. I'm sipping low key and honest, rider. I get those goosebumps every time. All around, yeah. Cause I'm on, you make everything feel fine. I get those goosebumps every time. I need the hype, throw that to the side. I get those goosebumps every time, yeah. When you're not around, we throw that to the side. I get those goosebumps every time.
Up the mags.
Yes, sir.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Loaded Mag NUFC. The Full Loaded Transfer Show is back again. We're back again after a very, very busy show yesterday. We're back for more, talking transfers, and we've got a very special guest to talk it with. But first of all, Daz, Chris, how are you on this fine Monday evening?
All good with me. All good with me in the office today, but all good on this Monday evening. Busy week ahead. Credit to Alex. He sprinted home from work to be on time for the show. And Chris swoops in just before the intro. Just we'll give him a minute before the intro. That's why we're slightly late. But Chris, how are you?
My bad. How am I? I'm joking. No, I'm good, boys. I mean, obviously, my first introduction to Alex, I was moaning to him about having to play for 11 aside tonight, so I'm a little bit nervous, especially after what Alex said. So yeah, fingers crossed I get through that okay. But no, I'm good. Good day in work. And yeah, I've been really looking forward to having Alex on tonight for his debut on Loaded Mag NUFC. So yeah, looking forward to talking all transfer targets. One will be very interesting, and I know you boys can't wait for that one to come up. But yeah, no, I'm really, really excited for tonight's show, and yeah, I'm all good. Pete, how are you doing, mate?
I'd love to tell you that I'm okay, but I'm really not.
Oh, mate, yeah, you said you're not well today.
Yeah,
I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie.
I'm not gonna lie.
Was playing up again. I can barely walk at the moment. I've got this all over my back. It's what's it called? Voltarol, back and muscle pain. I'm taking ibuprofens. I'm waiting for the doctor to be able to get an appointment. Yeah, it's been a bit of a mad day. But look, we're here. I'm settled in a structure where I cannot move my back. We are going to talk transfers, absolutely. But first of all, welcome into the chat. Got lots of people in the chat already throwing their points of view, opinions, questions, conversations in there. Just make sure you click the like, and make sure if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel if you are new to Loaded Mag NUFC. But look, let's not wait around. Let's bring him in. It's an absolute pleasure to welcome him for his debut. We have the Athletic Zone, and of course, a European expert. We have Alex Barker. So let's welcome him in for his debut.
Welcome, Alex.
Hello. Thank you.
How are you? Now you've had a chance to kind of get your breath back.
Yes, I left work a little late. I was actually working on a video on a player that I'll talk about at the end of this, I imagine. So that's a fun little reason to stay to the end here. Working very hard on it, checked the time, and left on time actually. And then London train lines delayed me a bit, so I got to a station and ran home to be ready and be in here. And then Chris arrived straight after, but it's all good.
That's it. It just eased you a little bit knowing that someone else is always like, I'm always like that. You know, when you're worried about being late, but then you know someone else is late behind you. You're like, yeah, I'm all right.
Yeah.
It's fine. But no, look, this has been a sort of going to be an interesting chat because you know we set you the kind of the task really for this particular show to think about Newcastle United in particular, and to look at certain players that maybe Newcastle should potentially target or would be ideal signings for the club. But before that, there'll be people that will be watching the channel, whether they're live now or watching it back, and maybe asking the question, what is it that you do, Alex? What's your role? How are you associated with the Athletics? So do you want to just tell us a little bit about what it is that you do and where your kind of expertise lie?
Absolutely. So I think it's important to say where I was before the Athletic, because my official title is videographer, not really to do with any football analysis, but that's how I made my name as the very provocatively named Euro expert. I swear it was just catchy. I'm not an egotistical maniac. But yeah, I've always enjoyed watching players abroad, teams abroad, a particular emphasis on Ligue 1. So a good example of this is one of my favorite teams of all time was the Lille 2021 season, where Sven Botman held the joint best defensive league in history and to the title. And you guys signed them, of course.
Yeah.
So I joined the Athletic after making videos on players, official capacity to make video for the Athletic, and then I fought my way into making analysis as well, and joining the guys like John McKenzie and JJ Ball in every week, coming up with topics in football and breaking them down tactically, getting shouted out on Twitter for being a tactico nerd and not enjoying the game and being obsessed with numbers. And I think that's basically my day, or it's summed up.
Brilliant stuff.
Great job.
Not bad, I might say, not a bad job, is it? Love it. Anything in football, we love that's for sure. But it's a pleasure to have you on. And like we said, we set you the task because as Newcastle fans at the moment in time, there's probably two main positions that we think are ideal to be strengthened. Whether it's this window in the summer and beyond, we'll get Newcastle fans that probably say more, and there probably is more, but two in particular. And we've highlighted, of course, the right wing position, the one position that Newcastle United have been desperate to strengthen in, and we've looked in particular for the defensive position, more so the sort of centre back role ish. And so, where do you want to start? Which position do you want to start, Alex? Because we can start wherever you want.
Let's start with right wing. I mean, I guess I spoke about a right winger I like for Newcastle recently, and my opinion has sort of changed actually a little bit since I uploaded that video.
Ah,
Chris, did you hear that?
Yeah. Okay, let's bring him up then. So do you want to talk a little bit about Taki Kubo?
Yeah, absolutely. So you might have seen the video I put up before, some people watching. I felt like a sensible transfer for Newcastle when I was given that video title, a great series it is. Taki Kubo was the guy I landed on. And there's a few key reasons why I went for him. And I won't be too exhaustive, given a lot of people may have already heard me talk about him. But the two main things were out of possession. He was a very good presser. So obviously Newcastle, while their best asset is how intense you are without the ball and how well you defend. While Kubo is like quite small, he's someone who Real Sociedad, they've been one of the best teams in like Europe for pressing, not necessarily just physicality, just like the smartness of it. And I really liked that about Kubo, and I felt he could join in with Newcastle in that regard. Whereas other right wingers who you might have been linked with, yeah, I wasn't as confident in. And then of course there is what he does on the ball, and I felt like he's 23 years old still, and he's growing into quite a nice two-way winger, able to go both ways, which I think is important generally. But I also still felt like at the time that Tino Livramento would be the best overlapping right back in the Premier League. And I liked the idea of having a right winger for Newcastle, being able to come inside. Maybe they're more comfortable on their left foot than their right, and that's okay. And Livramento could go on the outside. And I still think he'd be a good move for Newcastle and a sensible one. But what sort of changed since I uploaded that video, spoke with a few people, a couple of people actually like behind the scenes at Newcastle, was Eddie Howe seems very focused on physicality, and it's not enough to be just smart at pressing. And apologies if you can hear a dog next door, by the way. It's not even next door. It's miles away. It's just that loud. But with Eddie Howe, he seems to be a lot more focused on physicality, and Kubo is a bit smaller. So I thought, okay, I can understand why he might not want to go for him. And the other thing was a lot of Newcastle fans spoke about how they do actually like Livramento coming inside more and making sort of underlapping runs. And we think, okay, well, Kubo is okay going on his right foot, good, okay at crossing, but maybe it would be smarter to come up with a winger who can go on the outside and can cross, and maybe you have that bit more flexibility within your team. So I still think he's a good option, but there are a couple other players here that I think might be better ones, and another one I see a lot of teams, a lot of people are linking Newcastle to.
Okay, so should we start with the Premier League based right winger that you referred to in your list? So we'll start with this man. Tell us a little bit about why he, in your opinion, would be the best suited Bryan Mbeumo of Brentford.
Wow, I have subverted your expectations, I'm afraid, because I've thrown in because I know when I did my tweet about what right winger should Newcastle sign, so many fans pointed to Bryan Mbeumo. He was someone that's actually been reported Newcastle were interested in. And on the face of it, he does look like a good option, right? Like he's got, I think, 10 non-penalty goals this season. He's been tearing it up at Brentford, really. But I actually wanted to include him here because I feel like I had a feeling someone would ask me about him. And let's get him out away early. Thankfully, you've actually asked me about him straight away. I'm actually not keen on him to Newcastle. And I think, we'll put him to the side for now. And there's a couple of reasons for this. So, yes, he's having a good season. Scored 10 non-penalty goals, I believe. That is still better than any season he's had in the past. And he's massively outperformed his XG. Now, that's not to say, it's all going to come back down and it's all to rely on the numbers. But it's important to say, I think it's like 8 to 10 goals from about 3.9 XG in the last chart I looked at. It's such a drastic overperformance. And he's a very good finisher. Like, remember the goal he scored against Tottenham a couple of months ago? A great example of that. But he's not necessarily... he's not going to be someone who comes in, I think, and is instantly scoring goals. And that's also down to a bigger reason. I think something that goes under the radar when we talk about players we like, Bryan Mbeumo doing it well at Brentford, he could come to Newcastle, is how he'd actually fit in at Newcastle and the way Brentford play compared to the way Newcastle play. Because I think one of the interesting things that's happened with Newcastle this season, and feel free to jump in if you disagree, but it feels like you've had to come up against a lot more sitting defenses who aren't giving you room in behind, and you often struggle, definitely earlier in the season, to build a bit more slowly unpick the defense, because it's not really what Newcastle have been set up to do. And you've come up with more solutions recently with the Tonali and Bruno Guimaraes switch. But Brentford are almost always attacking at speed on the counter, and as a result, Bryan Mbeumo isn't really much of a winger. He's kind of more of a forward. I think I have the numbers next to me. In fact, he's completing, barely 1.4 dribbles per 90, which, for comparison, Kubo was around 2.5. I think Gordon's around the same. It's just really low, and he's rarely averaged a success rate above 40%, I think, as well. So not only is he not taking on his man often, he's also not really doing it successfully. And if you're right winger at Newcastle, you're often going to be playing against a fullback right in front of you. You haven't got that space to run into. You're going to have to take him on. And I don't think Mbeumo is going to do that. And on this final point, he's not necessarily a two-footed player, in my opinion, as well. And the thing I said at the beginning of why I'm not super keen on Kubo now, or quite as keen as I was, is because he's someone who I don't trust to go on the outside as much as Eddie Howe might want his right winger to do. Bryan Mbeumo definitely doesn't fit that task either. So while I'm sure maybe some people were hoping I would talk about Mbeumo and think he'd be a great fit for Newcastle, I think he's a good example, actually, of a winger who might not be a good fit.
It's really interesting that you say that, because obviously there'll be a few Newcastle fans will be going, what? Because you're absolutely right in what you said initially, Alex, is that most Newcastle fans would have him as our first choice. I think the only thing that's maybe swaying us away from that is the price that Brentford would maybe ask for him. But it's interesting you say that, particularly about not necessarily being two-footed. And lads, you'll know this. We talk about this all the time with regards to Miguel Almiron. Miguel Almiron not having a right foot and not being able to play or use his right foot when it's probably best to use his right foot. And I think, Chris, you even made note of the fact that you did use his right foot yesterday, and we were really shocked about the fact that you did. And it does make a difference, because we know on the left hand side that Gordon can use both. He can go down the left and use his left to knock the ball in, but he's obviously massively effective with his right. So it's really, really interesting that you say that. Yeah, boys, what do you make of that then? Mbeumo might not be the best for Newcastle United as we may think.
It's interesting. For me, I haven't really considered. I would love him at Newcastle, but I haven't really considered him joining in January because I just think he's going to be too expensive, and Brentford are going to want to hold on to him. So I've kind of haven't put him to the back of my mind. Let's say. But yeah, no, interesting the way you're looking at it, Alex. I'm even more interested to see who you think we should go for now. But Chris, what's your thoughts on Bueno?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And do you know what? It's quite refreshing, actually, Alex, because as you'll appreciate, when we do these fully loaded transfer shows, we have hundreds of names, all in the hat, all in the mix. So to kind of rule out a player was great, and you looking at it, from a stats or an analysis point of view, is really, really interesting, because no doubt that's exactly what the club will be doing. In terms of the hierarchy, in terms of Eddie Howe, the coaching staff, they'll be looking at these little intricate details, and probably, as you rightly pointed out, we're going to want a player who's very two-footed. We're not going to want someone who's predominantly, uses 1 foot, because as Pete rightly said earlier, we've already got that in Miggy Armour on, and we certainly don't want another one of those. So it's a really, really good observation. And despite Bryan Mbeumo looking really, really good, whenever we see him play, and he's got a lot of really good attributes, if he hasn't got that key attribute, I think you can clearly see why Newcastle may not potentially be in for them. Do you think as well, Alex? And this is a very broad question, but do you think that's maybe why some clubs haven't gone in for them, knowing what the price tag would be, and would that be like a big hindrance in terms of other clubs looking at him as well and thinking, do you know what? If you're forking out 50, 60 million plus, we're going to want someone who's good on both feet. Do you think that's a factor?
Yeah, I think it absolutely is a factor, and I think that is for Newcastle a big factor. But I also think generally the play style point is the bigger question, because seeing a couple people in the comments saying, but Bryan Mbeumo is great. Like, what do you mean? He's doing so well. And, what we're talking about here isn't saying Mbeumo is bad or anything, or that he's overrated. It's just he's not a great fit for Newcastle. And to answer your question, the idea of what clubs are looking at, I think a great example is another former Brentford player, Ivan Toney. He's someone who's been scoring goals at a better rate than Bryan Mbeumo, and no one went near him in the summer. And not to dive into him completely, but I think a big reason for that is, okay, Tony's doing great in a counter-attacking team. Yes, he's quite a big striker, could potentially win headers, but he often gets a lot of space. He's not. Brentford aren't necessarily pinning teams back in the same way a Newcastle do, definitely like a Chelsea or Man City aiming to do. So, okay, he's going to cost a lot of money, like Mbeumo would. Sure, he might be a good finisher, but is he actually going to work for us in the same way he works at Brentford? Seems like a big risk. Maybe we should look elsewhere. And I think that's the exact logic people are following. Clubs are probably going to follow with Bryan Mbeumo. Might work. There's a lot of qualities to admire, but perhaps it's not the cleanest fit. And if it goes wrong, then, we've got egg on our faces.
And boys, let's not forget, there's still a conversation being had about a player that's exactly in that bracket that Alex has just mentioned. And we've already got him, and his name's Harvey Barnes. And we've talked about him a lot, and I love him. I love him to bits. But and yesterday was an example, when you've got a team that are sitting back deep, and you've got a player like Harvey Barnes that likes to exploit that pace in and behind. We were there, West Ham at home last season. When we had space in and behind, he destroyed them and scored those 2 goals. We won 4-3, and it was brilliant. We loved it. But when you're having to break a team down, he's not really that guy. He's not the guy that's able to do that. And I think that's what you're saying, Alex, is that when you need to break that team down, you need someone to have something a little bit different to what maybe Bryan Mbeumo gives you. Is that kind of where you're at? Yeah,
exactly. It's just really fascinating as well to listen to you talk about Harvey Barnes, because I mean, this is a great thing about coming on channels here, because I might be able to provide the insight about other teams, but that thing about Harvey Barnes, I just he went under my radar when watching Newcastle, mainly because he doesn't start all the time. So yeah, it sounds like you've already experiencing that problem, and that is exactly what we're trying to avoid when looking at right wingers.
Absolutely.
The other thing as well with us having Paul Mitchell in now, spending like 60 million to bring in Bueno kind of defeats the purpose of having him, because I expect that he's a bit of a Euro expert as well. So I want to unearth some gems that we haven't heard of, or maybe you've heard of, Alex, and maybe you're going to bring a name here now as well that Paul Mitchell can shed some light on as well.
Definitely. Hopefully Paul Mitchell's watching, that's for sure. But yeah, okay, so we've looked at a player that we've been heavily linked with, like we said, Brian Mbeumo, who we're under the impression now is probably not the best link for Newcastle United. So who is Alex? Who out of the couple that we've got to talk about would you suggest is it could be a perfect fit for Newcastle?
Well, I think it's fitting that after giving you guys a name who has been linked and me immediately pooing along them and saying, no, actually, I don't like them, I'll give you a guy who has also been linked and I think has been suggested Newcastle shortlisted, who I've seen fans be quite wary of, who I do actually think is a perfect fit, and that's Johan Bakayoko of PSV. I've been reading quite a few conversations Newcastle fans have had about him on my timeline, and a lot of them say, should we really be shopping in the Eredivisie? I know your club hasn't had sometimes the best experience shopping in that market from the couple of players I can think of on top of my head. But Bakayoko is someone who I do think would break the Eredivisie curse. And he's also a really nice fit for exactly what I think Eddie Howe is looking for. So I'll give you a brief overview of all the qualities I like. First of all, a goal scorer. He's, I think, 21 goals and assists last season, around half that of goals. I think he's got a lot more goals this season off the top of my head. I've got the notes. I'm trying not to read them to be professional, but 6 so far in the league. And most of these are coming off his left foot, but we'll get onto his right foot in a bit. Don't worry. Cutting inside, bending shots into the far corner. He's got a bit, if we're going really nitty gritty detail here, got a bit of a weakness at shooting a cross goal, but in terms of curling it to the far corner, got a real skill there, a real nice ball striker, as we nerds would say. Now, goals, great asset there. Maybe taken from sometimes weak positions outside of the box. Tends to be a bit better when he's inside, a bit closer to goal. Creativity, other element. As I said, half of his output last season was assists. He's lower on assists this season, but the underlying numbers, so expected assists, the chances he's created for his teammates suggest he should have more. I think it was 2 assists last time I checked in the league. And there's a good reason for why I like him creatively, and that's because he is what we were talking about, two-way winger, someone who can go on the outside, dribble around the defender and use his right foot for cutbacks and crosses. I think there was a graphic I was looking at. If you've got it, feel free to put it on screen. It was showing where Bakayoko compared to other wingers in Europe, with the other one, I think. Bakayoko compared to other wingers in Europe, and it's like where they're cutting inside and outside. There we go. So great example. Lamine Yamal, you can think of here. He's going left on his inside, going left, cutting inside when he gets the ball. A couple of players, Grealish cutting inside when he's getting the ball. Bakayoko, a lot more mix you can see when he's coming. There's a lot more mix of he's coming left, cutting inside, or going right. A bit more shades of left and right there, which illustrates what I'm trying to say, where he's a very good dribbler, taking someone on, going around, cutting the ball back. I mean, actually, let's speak of his dribbling, because that is definitely his strongest asset. I can throw the numbers at you, but I feel like I've already done that already. So let me just describe how he plays and why I think Eddie Howe will really like him. This is a guy who's very physical. So not only can he trick his way past the defender, he's very fast, and he's also very strong. So if someone could bulldoze his way, now there's a cat going as well. Hopefully he can't. Yeah, probably can.
Is this a zoo you have there, Alex?
Apparently do. Apparently so. I'll ignore that and be professional, but it's okay. Someone who can bulldoze his way, bulldoze defenders out of the way. Like, I can't remember how tall he is. I think he's like 5'10". But you take one look at him and he's very well built. So good dribbler, good crosser, a very strong finisher as well. And all of this kind of leads to him to be quite good out of possession as well. Like I said, very physical player. He does suffer at the moment because he plays for PSV, who are managed by a coach called Peter Bosch, who, between us, is the manager I dislike most in Europe from a tactical perspective. He has created some horrendous teams. So Eddie Howe probably need to educate Bakayoko. But yeah, I think he's 21 years old still. So there's a lot of time for him to grow. He's putting up good numbers at the moment. His profile suits exactly what I think Newcastle are looking for. Sure, he might need a bit of time to adapt to the Premier League, but I think he ticks every box, to be honest.
I like that one from Johnny Two for life. But that cat isn't miles away, otherwise it's a lion. Love it.
Comments are good this week today.
Yeah. I can't help but notice that you have Carvin's Killia, KK on that graphic as well. Pity plays on the left, and pity that he's off to PSG, but he might have fit the bill as well.
Oh yes, yeah. Yeah, it's a fun graphic to look at, and I think this is such an important thing to talk about, like we were speaking about before, where I think the reason I went for Kubo, like I said, was also because in my head, Newcastle was still that team where you're not quite the, pinning teams back consistently, I guess, even though I had sort of acknowledged it earlier in the season. But when redoing the research for the show today, I did come up with a lot more of a stronger approach of Newcastle. Maybe you just have to look past teams. Someone mentioned in the comments, look past players who are strong in the counter-attack and now start to buy players who are precisely there to unlock deep blocks. I mean, if you can look at Arsenal at the moment, right, I think they've got this wrong. I think they've bought a lot of players who aren't good at unlocking deep blocks, and now they're coming up against teams who are actually struggling to unlock.
Yeah. Really, really interesting stat there on or information on there, and Johan Bakayoko, because we've talked about him on this channel, and he does seem like a player that does or could fit Newcastle United really. Or why do you think people have the opinion that he might not do well over in England in comparison to Holland? There's a few people in the chat, people that we know, referring to them as sort of like farmers leagues. Like, why do people have sort of that opinion, and how do we sort of break that mold? Because we do get quality players.
Yes. Ten Hag and Anthony.
That might be one reason. But
there's one reason, yes.
How do we break that mold then? Like, why is it that we have that opinion?
Well, I think there's a lot of reasons. And by the way, I've turned my mic volume down to hopefully make sure the zoo isn't audible. If you laughed, you can still hear me, so that's all good. It's a really interesting question. And as someone, like I said, who kind of built my career on European football, right, it's one I've always looked to tackle, because it is a really interesting thing of how players translate from league to league. I think depending on the expert you ask, I'm not including myself in that, you'll get a different answer. So there have been data experts who've literally mapped out the average, for example, strikers in the Bundesliga, how much their goal totals decline when they move to the Premier League, like just looking at the numbers. There's other experts who will look at the way each team and league plays and will say, okay, this league is maybe a bit more transitional, so more counterattacks. They're going to get less space in the Premier League. I think there's so many factors that come into it. But when you asked, your first question was like, why are people so wary about the players coming from the Eredivisie? I think is good comment. I think there's fear stories, right? Anthony's a recent one. Obviously, I think there's a guy called De Jong who you guys have had, who's not been particularly amazing. Cody Gakpo as well took quite a while to get going at Liverpool. Mm-hmm. I think it mainly comes down, in my opinion, to players coming from like dominant Ajax teams in the past and the bottom of the Eredivisie being of a really low quality. Like, I'm in danger of going off on a massive tangent here, but some people in the past have like tried to make the argument the Eredivisie is of a higher quality than Ligue 1, and it's a better league. And at times it's been ranked higher by UEFA coefficients. But there was some really good analysis done by a couple of my colleagues, which showed, and this really highlights what's a flag to be wary of in the Eredivisie, is that while, overall both the Liga and Eredivisie's qualities might seem, if you were to map it on numbers, like at a similar point, if you're putting on a bar chart, when you break it down, Liga is more about, bar PSG, quite a lot of teams that are pretty good bunched together. While in the Eredivisie, you've got Ajax, PSV, Feyenoord, RZ, and then right at the bottom, you've got the much weaker teams. And that gap is beginning to narrow, but I think that's why you see quite a lot of players for Ajax, for example, put up massive goal and assist numbers, and then it quite quickly decline. And it's because they aren't facing like really weak competition anymore. But just to round this off, the reason I don't think this applies to Bakayoko is because what I'm more excited about with him is his profile. And I've watched him a lot, and I don't think he's getting goals and assists just because it's bad defending. I think what you're looking for when you're looking for players translating from one league to another is style, what we were talking about before. It's not just league, it's like club to club, but it's also their raw qualities. Like, it doesn't matter how bad a defender is for VV Vienlo or whatever the club is, or Willem II. It doesn't matter how bad they are, but that doesn't change Bakayoko's pace, his strength, for example, how cleanly he can strike a ball. These are qualities that, okay, maybe they'll look more cinematic if a defender falls over while he's taking it past them. But I don't think it actually, if you're watching a lot of him, I think you're able to separate what looks good and what actually is his qualities and skills.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that.
One of my worries is like we had two players that went to the Dutch league last season. We had Yakubu Minta who ripped it up and was brilliant for Feyenoord, and then like we never got to see him in a Newcastle jersey, but he's got to Brighton. He's done okay so far. It's early days. He may excel. But then we had Garan Kowal as well, who went to a lower team in that same Eredivisie league, and didn't do an awful lot. But so I don't know. You always have a bit of a worry when it comes to players coming from that Dutch league. Like he Johan Bakayoko, he looks unreal in the YouTube clips I've seen. But that's my only worry is the pedigree he's up against week on every week he's playing.
Yeah, I think, like I said, that's an absolutely fair worry, and I think it has impacted players in the past. But it is worth, if we were to retort with that, it's easy to name like players who've failed coming out of the Eredivisie in recent years. Anthony being one, Ziyech being another. There also are players who have shined, like Mohamed Kudus is one, for example. West Ham, he's been actually considered added him to this, but I wasn't sure. I think West Ham were able to charge a lot of money for him, and I think didn't think it was sensible to put him forward. But Kudus, he came straight from the Eredivisie and immediately, has started tearing it up. And yes, it's different leagues, but I think there's teams in Italy, for example, who've picked up a few Eredivisie talents and succeeded. Tim Koopman has been in one, went to Atalanta, had a little bit of a bedding in period, now is at Juventus and regarded as one of the best players in that league. I think there's so many factors that come into this when evaluating basically player talent. There's also off the field reasons why you should shop in the Eredivisie, for example, like Dutch players, or Bakayoko's case, Belgian players growing up in that area tend to be more likely to speak English, right? So it's a nice attraction to come to a Premier League club. That's something that I think often goes under the radar on like how important it is moving to clubs. I'm not sure on Anthony's case, but I think that's almost undoubtedly a fact. He came from Brazil, went to the Netherlands, and going straight to the Premier League. He's been on a very wild ride. Maybe it was fair to expect him to, take a bit more time to get into the country. But I will round this off actually by saying with Anthony, if you look at reports at the time, Man United valued him at £25 million. Like, they valued him as a prospect, and because the club is, in my opinion, not particularly well run, or wasn't particularly well run. Now they've got new owners, of course. They held out massively for him. If you watched Anthony at the time, like I did, that was like 4 years ago. My eye, in terms of watching players, rubbish back then, rubbish. And even then, you could still look at him and go, this is someone who's cutting inside a lot, is somewhat predictable here. Is this a potential red flag? Whereas with Bakayoko, there isn't really that case. He's going both ways around fullbacks, so he's comfortable doing it. I don't have those red flags.
Yeah, I think I'm with you. I'm with you on Bakayoko. I do think he'd be a good player in the Premier League, whoever he went to. And I think he has from the bits that I've seen of him, he does have that knack where he can create a little something out of nothing, which is almost what you need, particularly. And I keep referring to this sort of, low block type style, because that's our biggest frustration. That's our biggest issue of being able to break a team down. You can already see when we play against the likes of Arsenal, Man City, Liverpool, Aston Villa, those top teams, Chelsea, and they come to play against us, we can hit them on the break with the likes of Isaac Gordon, and we've got that pace in them behind. So I'm never really worried about that. It's that breaking down. And I do think I've seen little pockets of him being able to do that. Whereas, I think it's a fair point. We haven't seen that from the likes of Mbeumo, because he's a team that's not necessarily having to break down a low block. So I do get what you're saying there for sure. There was another image, and I think this was related to Bakayoko.
Yes.
With regards to his ball carrying skills. So I didn't know if you just want to talk through that a little bit, or you already covered it already.
No, I sent you graphic, and it's worth reiterating, right? It's like, I think this chart is interesting because it shows it, like, his open play passes and how much of a contribution that is to his shots. It shows that I think it would be easy to look at him as just a guy who's dribbling and no end product, and supported what I was saying before I got distracted by my cat meowing is I think he's a very nice assister in the box. He's good at either floating a ball to the back post on his right foot or cutting it back as well. For a player arriving, it's just find it interesting that I did have an example at my hand, but there's another player I looked at recently in Italy who's it was a lot more balanced in this. And you'd look at this and you think, okay, this is someone who maybe isn't actually dribbling that much, only takes up 12% of this chart, but he's also, I think, statistically one of Europe's most prolific dribblers. And I think he averaged a 50% success rate last season as a 20-year-old, which, by the way, is superb numbers. 50%, and Mbeumo's below 40, that for context there. And yeah, sure, it's against weaker defenders, but it's also a less experienced player as well, right? So yeah, I think this really just goes to show how varied a threat Bakayoko is.
Nice. I see no orange there. He doesn't track back like Jacob Murphy. I know. No, he does look a good prospect. To be fair, and I think whoever does take the gamble on him, we'll see. We could reap the rewards from him.
Yeah.
We'll just round off on Johan Bakayoko, because I think the lads, you for a question up from Nobby Clark here, and I'll kind of just add to this. He says, what are the chances of signing or trying to sign someone like Bakayoko in January, or is it all pie in the sky? I'm not expecting to have answers on that, Alex, but what I will ask you, in addition to what Nobby said, is that how much do you think he would be worth, in your opinion? What's his value at?
Well, I think if it was last summer, value would have been, I included him in the video of sensible transfers to Tottenham Hotspur. And I think I had it, I can't remember his value off the top of my head. I think it's around 20 mil on Transfermarkt. Obviously, that's just a guide, really. I think last summer he'd come off the back of a really good year. So maybe you're looking 30, 40 above. I think he's now in a, like I said, his actual output in terms of goals and assists has declined a little bit. And I think that's more to do with his teammates not finishing off his chances. I do think this is someone in this market, you're probably looking maybe 30 to 40 million, which I know is somewhat pricey, but we've spoken about Mbeumo being valued at 60 million. Anthony Elanga, who Newcastle inquired about in the past, he'd definitely be worth that much now. So this is still definitely on the cheaper end of the market.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah. You have one more right winger that you wanted to talk about, and I would probably say, when I saw this, I'd probably say this was maybe a bit of a wild card. Would you go along with that, Alex, as a potential signing?
Pete, me and you are on the same page. You've introduced all of my options in the exact same way I wanted to introduce them. This is perfect. Yeah, this is exactly a wild card. It's a player you might remember watching, Nathan Teller, formerly of Burnley under Vince Kompany. Now, as you can picture, Bayer Leverkusen. And there's a reason you haven't heard of him, and that's because Bayer Leverkusen have Florian Wirtz and Jonas Hoffmann, and they've recently won the Bundesliga with their starting 11. So Nathan Tella, who was brought in as like a prospect, hasn't really got that many minutes. But the other reason you haven't heard of him so much is because he hasn't done amazingly well in terms of goals and assists. It's because he's kind of an awkward fit for Bayer Leverkusen. A rare instance of, I think, weak recruitment. So let me just backtrack a second. Let's take you back to the reason why they ended up signing him. He's now 25, but when they signed him a couple of years ago, I think he was 22 years old. And he's just hit 22 goals in the championship with Burnley. Had a really exciting season as a right-footed right winger. And won the championship as well with Burnley. And I think they wanted to retain him but couldn't. Leverkusen signed him, and then Xabi Alonso kind of shifts this 3-4-3 system. He experimented a bit in his first half season with Leverkusen. But then Teller arrives, Frimpong plays at right wing back, Grimaldo plays at left wing back, and then you have your two number 10s in Wirtz and Hoffman, a couple other players. Teller, as a right-footed right winger, isn't going to play over Frimpong, who's the right wing back. Bit of an awkward fit for the number 10 slot. So he's not really being able to flourish there. And you watch him, and he's done quite well. He's very good in tight spaces, I think. So that means, someone's coming in to tackle him, and he's very quick to turn away out of pressure and very quick to nutmeg. But he's not really his prime position. And I think that's led to his value declining quite a bit. It's led to his stock declining in general. So I think he's a player going under the radar as someone who, when we saw in the championship and when we've actually seen him at Leverkusen, has shined, but at the moment isn't getting an opportunity. And I think he's a good option for Newcastle because what we were talking about before, okay, he's not two-footed, but one of the complaints people had about Kubo was this is someone who's a bit more reliant on cutting inside. Tedder's more of the opposite. I think he can come inside. He's decent on his left, but he's more about going on the outside. And Newcastle seem to be getting a lot of luck at the moment from cutbacks and crosses on that side. It seems to be a dynamic that's working. So this is an option you can throw in there. A couple of strengths and weaknesses. So one weakness I have got at the moment is dribble success rate is lower than Bakayoko. If you compare these two players, Bakayoko's a lot more well physically built, a lot stronger. He can resist challenges, can bulldoze his way. Teller is a bit weaker and can be pushed over a bit more. So maybe a bit of a red flag for Eddie Howe, which would be fair enough. But I also think he's a very good finisher. Someone who's outperformed his expected goals, I think 3 seasons in a row, where shows that he's, compared to the average player, he is able to finish tougher chances than most would. So yeah, I think he'd be the cheapest option we spoke about here. And it'd definitely be more of a gamble. But if Newcastle haven't got so much money to play with, do like this guy as a wild card. And for what it's worth, I think he will, if he gets a move to a place where he can play in his favoured position more, then we'll start to hear his name a lot more often.
Interesting one.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And I like the fact that you mentioned about the fact that, he is right-footed and he's naturally going to go down to his right-hand side as more of that sort of traditional old-school winger. You go down your right-hand side with a right foot and whip the ball in. And you're right, Alex, and lads, you'll know this as well. We've had a lot of Colin, please. Even now, I'm struggling. I've literally got my elbow on the table to stop. With Jacob Murphy, we're getting that success at the moment. He is playing his natural winging style. He's whipping that ball in. It's almost like Isak knows that he's going to get the ball now, so he's making runs knowing that he's going to get on the end of it. It's an interesting option going for. Chris, I know you mentioned it back in the summer about potentially, we're looking for that right winger that's got a left foot that could cut inside. But is there a potential, lads, that we will look for a right-footed right winger that's got that natural width that can go down there as a Teller potential?
Yeah, but I can't see us going. I think we'll go for someone higher up the pecking order. I think, a gamble. That'd be a big gamble. He would have to be someone that. So if for a player in that category, I think it would have to be someone maybe that Paul Mitchell, our sporting director, for the person who asked the question earlier, would know an awful lot about or would have worked with before.
Let me throw a retort to you, because I agree. I think it, like I said, it is a big gamble.
Yeah.
But if you like the idea of a right-footed right winger, can you name someone better that Newcastle could get? There's not many of that profile knocking around, and that is the big thing. So maybe if you want to come to a decision here, if you're Paul Mitchell and you see, maybe you try and pick up Teller as a loan with a cheap obligation to buy, and then you target your left-footed player. Maybe you go for your Bakayoko or someone else who you can rely on a bit more, and then you've got two options, and then you can sell Almiron out the back door and maybe phase Murphy out.
No, it's, you know what, Alex, it's really interesting what you're saying, because when you were talking about it, and you know, we talk about, you know, this PSR world that we're in now. You know, we can't just go and splash the cash on, you know, the exact players that we want. And I had a quick look then on Google, good old Google, to see how much that Leverkusen had paid for Teller, and it was like 20 million. And if, as you say, he's kind of a, you know, square peg round hole type player. You know, if you were to go in, as you've already mentioned, maybe with a loan with an obligation or loan with an option, he almost feels a little bit like, tell me if this is wrong, I know it's the opposite side, almost like an Ademola Lookman, you know, where he's never quite got the right move, and then he's ended up at Atalanta absolutely smashing it. And, you know, now he's got a huge release clause, which people are thinking of activating. But it's not to say that he's a bad player. It's just that maybe he's not perhaps at the right club. So an opportunity like that to sign someone like him and get him for a reasonable price, because you'd assume, wouldn't you, if they've paid 20 million for him, if someone came in and offered anywhere between 10 and 15 million, that they might think, you know what, cut our losses and reinvest it elsewhere in the squad. Where else are you going to get a player who, you know, has got such good numbers in the Championship, has obviously got the Premier League experience, got Bundesliga experience, for a 10 to 15 million price tag? You're probably not going to find many, are you, really? A really good age as well, still only 25.
Yeah, exactly that. I had my head down because I was making sure to get his numbers up from this season, which is still fine. Like, he's got 12, he's played started 5 games, he's got 1 goal, 2 assists, which is absolutely fine. And last season was 5 goals and 2 assists in only 8 starts. So like, it really is like, there is a lot of sub appearances, of course, but yeah, like you say, it's a very cheap option, a potentially very cheap option in the PSR world, which, you know, I think it's easy for me in my position, especially someone who doesn't support a football team. I'm a neutral. I know it's grim, to forget PSR exists.
No
Whereas you
team at
guys,
all.
not a team at all, not a team at all.
Wow.
But yeah, you guys, I remember like Newcastle last summer had the PSR scare. So it's something I often forget is going to be at the forefront of your mind. And you're right. I think the Lookman comparison was a great one. This could be getting someone in who's low risk and maybe turns into that. And at worst is, you know, he's probably not going to be worse than Jacob Murphy. Like, and that's no disrespect to Jacob Murphy. He's having a very good purple patch at the moment, isn't he? But like, you bring him in on a cheap deal, if it is a loan option to buy, it's not necessarily going to be a downgrade on him. And if you sign him for, you know, a cheap fee and use him as rotation player, it's probably fine.
Yeah.
And another wild card. And someone he was mentioned before last year at one point, Luca Colioso at Burnley, who I'm not sure what he's doing this year, but he looked good when I saw him before. But he's only 20 years old as well. But let's see. I think we'll go for someone more established though.
And who was the lad? I can't remember the name. I'm racking my brains. Who was because Burnley must have a habit of producing good wingers, mustn't he? Because Spurs signed a Burnley winger, didn't they? Odebear, that's it. Odebear.
Yeah.
And he's not getting much game time at the moment, is he? But he's always looked decent when he's come on for Spurs. But he must be injured, I'm assuming, because
he's injured, but he's
Burnley.
actually. To speak about him a second, he was a fun one because this is very. I'll be quick with the centre backs, don't worry. But when I did my video on Spurs last summer for the Athletic on sensible transfers, I wanted to put him in. Like he hadn't been linked at all to the club. I wanted to say this is a winger that Spurs should sign for their left-hand side. And I spoke with a few Spurs fans and said, no, we want a right winger. So like, I like your idea, but he's probably not a good fit. Didn't include him in the video, and then Spurs go and sign him and play right wing anyway. And it's like, what are you doing? Could have got me the best clip ever. But I think he'll be in a similar way to Teller, square peg in round hole. I'm not convinced he can play well off the right. So if you, God forbid, ever lose Anthony Gordon in future, Wilson Odobert might be a name that ends up cropping up. Quite like him.
Interesting.
Interesting, very interesting. There was one question from Phoenix Fire. I'm just going to steal the chat. Just
Go for it, mate.
This is kind of like just to go against the right-footed right winger situation. If we sell Almiron, we have no left footers in the entire attack or midfield. Is that worrying? Is that a concern at all, or to add balance and have a left footer, right footer? Would that be a concern if we don't sign a left-footed right winger?
I think it is. I think it's my first choice would still be a left-footed right winger. In the Kubo video, this was actually another big reason, and that was because, like, I think Phoenix Fire is onto something here, because you want someone who can play left-footed passes. It sounds really like simple, but you know, you think of it in Newcastle's squad, you've got Guimaraes and Tonali kind of coming on that right-hand side. You've got Murphy as well. It's working at the moment, and if Howe continues to make it work, right-footed right winger might be exactly what they need. But when you're going to come up against teams who sit deep, what you want is a lot of ways you can hurt them. And in that, you want someone who can play different types of passes from different angles. So, you know, it's a really complicated one to explain without coming across as, you know, a bit pretentious. But the best way I can give an example is, like, it's the same logic for why you want a left-footed left centre-back. And it's something Pep Guardiola spoken about, where, you know, if you have a right footer passing to your left back, the ball is going to be curving towards their feet, which means they're probably going to have to take a touch to get it out of their feet, which gives the opponent's defender, time to close them down. Whereas if you have a left-footed player making that pass to the left back, then it's going to be curling in front of them, and it's going to be allowing them to take a positive touch forward, and it's like a more positive way. It's just like a more positive pass that's meant to be more forward thinking. So, but I guess with Kubo, for example, or left-footed right winger, you want that player who can cut inside and make that cross towards that back post, like the clipped cross that Lamine Yamal has mastered. So, I really see Phoenix Fire's point. I threw Taylor in there as a wild card. I still like him. I think it'd be great if you could pick him up alongside someone else. But I actually agree with him. I do think you need a left footer in the entire midfield and attack.
It's the way you receive the ball as well. It's your body shape, because you're coming onto your favoured foot. I think it was one of the things that I looked and noticed with Sven Botman when he played against Spurs in his first game back after 10 months. People were saying, oh, yeah, we shouldn't have started because he had a little bit of a rocky start. And I think one of the things is that he had to adjust his game because he's so used to receiving the ball on his left-hand side, playing left centre-back. He was now receiving it on his right foot first. And they had, and to be fair to Spurs, they had a fantastic press. They pressed really high up and really well, particularly in those first 10, 15 minutes. And the way Sven was receiving the ball on his right foot, he did have to take that extra touch, and he got caught out a couple of times. Once he'd readjusted himself, he was fine, and they couldn't get near him. And I think it is a really important point, and I think it just kind of adds into what you're saying, Alex. So I do understand that point, but hey, Johan Bakayoko, that's why we brought to the table, eh? Absolutely. But I know we're coming short on time, so we'll whip through your centre back options, Alex. I know you
went off on a tangent there. Yeah,
go on. Great chat, and I think sometimes, and this is the great thing about having you on, Alex, is that sometimes these little intricacies about the game is things that we, as football fans, don't necessarily consider. So the fact that you're bringing them to the table tonight, and some people may not see them as significant or important, but they are. And as Chris mentioned earlier to you, this is what the club will be looking at. So it's important for us to consider that as fans, because it's easy for us to say, we'll just get him, no problem, blah, blah, blah. But actually, there is a lot to it in terms of what they want to get out of the player joining the club. But first centre-back option, and it's a player from Monaco.
Yes, it's Wilfried Singo. And like I said, we'll be quicker with these. He's been someone who's been hyped up a lot recently. I can suggest him to Newcastle. there are some big strengths and big weaknesses. First, I think it is worth saying like what I've based my Newcastle centre back search on, and it's actually the biggest problem I've had with Newcastle watching you this season. I'm hoping when I say this, I'm going to get smiles all round who agree, but I hate the fact that Newcastle are a pressing, aggressive team. You're really good at pressing from the front. You're great with the midfield, really tight. But Dan Burn and Fabian Schär are always about 5 yards behind whoever they're meant to be tracking, particularly Dan Burn. And it's so frustrating to watch, particularly early in the season. Game that springs to my head, Newcastle versus Fulham. Raul Jimenez is not the most mobile player. Sure, he's not like a Peter Crouch or whatever, but he was continuously able to drop off Dan Burn. Burn looks to track him, realizes I am way too slow to close that distance. I'm going to have to back off. Jimenez gets the ball, turns, receives, and plays it. And Newcastle's press, all their intensity for nothing. So centre-backs I've put here are first and foremost players who can defend and will aggressive and will stay tight. And that's exactly why I've put Wilfried Singo in. He's a weird story. Like I said, I'll try and keep it brief. I think he played in the Ivory Coast, went to Torino as a high-flying right wing back, right? Charging up and down the touchline, not a defensive player, goes to Monaco, plays as a right centre-back in the back three in his first season, which was last year. And this year, right centre-back in the back two. So he's weirdly come from attacking right wing back all the way into the middle. And clear reason for that is he is 6'3", wins tons of his aerial duels. I think it was like 68% consistently. He's got 90% tackle win rate. When he's on you, he will win the ball. Very physical player who, in all the time I was watching him the other day, I did a big scout report on him. Didn't see him get shifted once. Could shift anybody off the ball. So meets the requirement of what Newcastle will be looking at exactly. And you've got Sven Botman as well, right? So you can do with a right footer on that side too. Weakness. This will be a trade-off that, if Newcastle want to accept, they could. I think this is the big thing you're going to have to work on with him. He, as a passer, he can spot teammates to pass to inside the block. So I think he's got good vision there. He's also a good ball carrier. Technique still lacking. If you want my theory, I think it's a case of he's never been coached on it and never had to be if he's being a wing back. But as a centre back, a lot of his passes over range are quite bouncy. So he racks up. This is a good example of when stats aren't everything. For progressive passes, I think he was like one of the top players in Ligue 1. I think he's at the 98th percentile on FBref or around about that. But his passes are often quite bouncy, leaving the players receiving them in a lot of trouble trying to make anything out of them. So to be clear, Singo, I think would solve defensive problems. You'd need to coach him on the ball. He's 24 years old, so I think there is time to do that. But he's a very interesting profile.
He's not a bad age. He's not a bad age, 24.
Not a bad age. No. I guess the thing that stands out straight away is Monaco. So Paul Mitchell would know all about him already, having come from Monaco. And he, like, ideally for us, we want a young Fabian Schär. But it's very difficult to find a young Fabian Schär because his passing is absolutely exceptional and he can take a shot as well. So I don't think we're going to get a like for like no matter what we do, whoever we look at. If we spend a little amount or a crazy amount, we're never going to get like for like. But any thoughts, lads?
I think the biggest thing for me is certainly what I think Eddie Howe and the coaching staff will be looking at as well. I think we need someone in behind with pace. We need someone who's really good with recoveries, because that's one thing you could argue that Sven Botman lacks. Like, he's not the quickest. I'm not saying he's slow, but he's not the quickest in recoveries. And Fabian Schär's exactly the same. If we had a really, but how much does it cost to buy a ball playing centre half who's incredibly quick and very tall and good in the air? It's not cheap, is it? So maybe someone like Singo would be good in terms of someone who you can coach and someone who you can work on and improve. So yeah, for me, my biggest one would be the pace. I do think we need someone next to Sven Botman who is particularly blessed with pace, because I do think that would help us, particularly in moments where we're hit on the counter and you have that deep line centre back who kind of stays and looks to recover. Because at times, when we've played with the likes of Schär, Botman, Burn, if a player gets in and behind, you almost know the race is over, and then you're just relying on the goalkeeper then, because that they're not going to catch the striker, particularly if it's a really fast one.
Yeah, Singo is absolutely rapid. So it's exactly in line with your thinking. It's going to cost so much money to bring in a ball-playing centre-back who's also really physical, like defending, and is also really quick. So maybe you have to sacrifice one of those. And maybe for Newcastle, it's that ball-playing thing. And if you wanted your back line to be Sven Botman spraying the passes, Singo maybe slowly learning off him and Shah, and he's just keeping everything secure, he'd be that guy.
Yeah, I think everything that you described about what we kind of want and need in a centre back is why we were so heavily linked with Mark Gay, because he kind of offers all of that. Maybe his aerial drills are not great, or not at the height of some of our other centre backs, but everything else is. And I think that's really, really crucial. So it'd be a good alternative. And like you said, he's still young enough where you can kind of coach that element out of his game. I just worry that he'd be a Disasi type player, who hasn't really hit the ground running coming to the Premier League, having come from Monaco, going to Chelsea, because he does make a lot of mistakes, but I trust Eddie. I trust Eddie Howe to work with that. But we'll move on really quickly to the last two. Another one from France this time. Is it Alexandro Ribeiro?
Ribeiro, yes. I can offer you something here, because the other option we could speak about is Akbar Silla, who is more of a I would have put him forward as a prospect, someone who could replace someone could long-term replace Dan Burn. But if you're in the interest of time, we can talk about Alexander Ribeiro for extended, because I've kept it quiet online and I'm giving you guys a bit of an exclusive because I've got a video coming on in tomorrow.
Oh,
this little centre-back, I think, is the best centre-back on the market, period, and no one's spoken about him. And I've got some mind-blowing stats to talk about with him. So if you want to skip over Silla, do you want to go straight into Ribeiro?
Go over it.
I'm sold, mate. I'm sold. Get the popcorn. I'm sold.
Silla who? Carry on.
Right. Alexander Ribeiro. If you don't know much about him, fair enough. No links whatsoever. I put out a tweet saying I've found a player who I think is the best centre-back on the market. Who do you think it is? About 400 people replied. 2 people guessed his name. Okay, so really uncovered. Maybe that's because he's 25, not under 23, so he's not, Football Manager wonder kid whatsoever. He also played alongside Lenny Yoro. He was the guy Man United signed, so surely he's the worst centre-back, right? Well, so he's 25 years old, Brazilian, and he joined Lille 3 years ago. Right-footed player, but playing left centre-back. He is now a player who I've watched a couple of games to count. I mean, I've watched a lot more of him, but a couple of games where I just counted his passes. In one of them, 43% of his passes came with his left foot, which is astonishing. That's his weaker foot. The other game, over 50% of his passes came with his weaker foot. I don't know how you could get more two-footed than this. Heung-min Son, I remember looking at his touches. He was, 5-star weak foot on FIFA. He's the guy you think, this guy's two-footed, great on both feet. He was 70-30 split. This is Ribeiro taking more touches on his weaker foot at left centre-back. So he can play across that back line. This also means that he can play complete range of passes. What we were speaking about before, you want a left-footer to play certain passes, right-footer to play certain passes. Ribeiro can do both. He's also one of Europe's top progressive passers, and that is definitely because he is finding players in advanced positions, not just hitting it out wide to his fullback. He's also a decent ball carrier too, so I think he suits all the things you want on the ball of a Newcastle centre-back, right? Get this, he's also one of the best defenders in Europe, like in terms of defensive stats. He's got the 4th best aerial win rate in Europe's top 5 leagues. It was 80% last time I checked. Wow. Absolute monster at the back. And I think that's a stat that does carry over well into the Champions League too. But Ligue 1 is a really physical league. And there's a reason a lot of teams are buying centre-backs from the league, Sven Botman being one, of course. It tests centre-backs a lot physically, both going backwards towards your goal and in the air. And Ribeiro is dominant in the air. Oh, speaking of which as well, he's also one of the leaders in ball recoveries. He's someone who's very quick. He's at Lille, he's asked to be very aggressive, step out of his back line, close players down. Basically what you want from a Newcastle centre-back. But he's also their guy to, at the moment, get back and cover. Last season was interesting. Lenny Yoro was more the guy holding back as like a sweeper, if you want. He's gone. Ribeiro's like having to take more responsibility of tracking back, and he's been shining with that. So, recap so far. Great on the ball with his passing. Great on the ball with both feet as well. Dominant in the air. I think he's got like a 68% tackle win rate, which again, I'm for my video tomorrow, I'm saying he's a sensible transfer for Spurs, but ending it by saying he's great for all clubs. So don't worry. And compared to Romero van der Ven, he's got like the same tackle win rate, which is like 68%. So ranking pretty well with those guys as well. I really don't have much else in my notes beyond that. I don't think I might be glossing over something. So please feel free to poke me. Oh, you forgot about this or X. What is he like here? But I'm so shocked no one has spoken about him. And we've spoken a lot throughout this about we want to think about what clubs are looking at. My job, my aspiration really is to get good enough at doing football analysis, football talk, to be on the level of someone who could work in a football club. After speaking with a couple of people who do work in a football club, or at least on that level, they're also looking at him like he's taking more passes with his weak foot than his strong foot. That's mental. What are you talking about? This is someone that's taken them off guard as well. That's my pitch. Has anyone convinced?
Has anyone got the number to Paul Mitchell? Very, very quickly. And we need to send it to him quickly because I imagine the Spurs fans will be on that video tomorrow when it lands. So, boys, a really exciting alternative that I've not seen a lot of. I've got to be honest.
Wow.
He's down on Sofa Score. I'm looking at here, but he's down on 12.4 million. So you imagine you pick him up for under 20.
Yeah, I think he is Lille's first choice. So even then, the idea for why I've put him forward in this video I'm doing before and for this now is because I don't think he's not got that hype, right? None of us have heard about him, and I can't see him being more than he definitely can't be more than 40 in my opinion. I think he's in that 20 to late 30 ballpark, and it's someone who's been their first choice centre back for 2 years. A team that's actually, I think, one of the best defenses of the Champions League this season as well, that kept Real Madrid at bay too. It's just got all the qualities that you want. And it was someone that when I kind of discovered more and more about him, I got more and more excited. And you can tell when the passion I've spoken about him here is how much, if all the players we've spoken about today, he's the one by far, if you ask me who is going to be a world beater, it'll be him. Easy.
Wow.
You sure you're not a Spurs fan though, Alex?
I am certain, believe me.
Well, I did bring this along just in case you sure. If you fancy joining the club, you're always welcome, Alex. But yes, we will definitely be Ribeiro. Am I pronounced that right? Ribeiro?
Yes, you are. Yes.
Alexandro Ribeiro. Remember the name. We will be taking definitely a closer look with him. And he's always on the ball, signing for next to nothing.
If I could convince you one more line as well, Sven Botman's come from Lille, so is Lenny Yoro, so is Gabriel. Their centre-back production is nuts at Lille.
Yeah. And he's Brazilian, Alex. We love a Brazilian at Newcastle. So he's ticking that box as well.
Why not add to the contingent, eh? And add another one. And let's not forget, we've been heavily linked with Jonathan David, and he's another one that's producing some good stuff at Lille as well. But Alex, it's been a great chat. Imagine that, eh? Imagine that. That'd be great. Or work alongside him. Work as a double team.
Maybe in 20 years, guys.
Yeah.
But Alex, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. Thank you for your insight. So many people in the chat, quite rightly, really enjoyed your thoughts on players that could potentially be associated with Newcastle and what you think would be the right signings for them. It's been great, and we'd love to have you back, maybe to talk other players or the same players, maybe in the build up to the summer if you'd want to come back.
Oh, of course, and just Newcastle in general. I mean, it's been a pleasure to be on, and I'm very happy everyone's happy with what I've said. But it's also been helpful for me to sit here, like the stuff you were saying on Sven Botman and how he looked awkward receiving on his right. That's just a nice bit of knowledge that I hadn't even looked at. And the Harvey Barnes stuff as well. This is, I'm glad to have helped. It's also great just to talk about Newcastle, because I think they're a really interesting team this season. They're one I'm trying to pay close attention to. So, you scratch my back, I scratch yours.
Absolutely.
Welcome to the tune. Alex, welcome to the tune.
We signed you guys. We did it. We signed
We
you.
signed them.
But no, just a quick reminder for everyone in the chat, if you haven't clicked the likes, we've had around 300 live watching, probably way more than that, and there'll be loads watching it back. If you haven't clicked the like, just take a second to do that. All the algorithms and all the rest of it will allow more people to be able to see and hear Alex's fantastic analysis on and suggestions of players for Newcastle United. So hopefully you'll all be kind of coming away tonight keeping an eye on a few more additional players that Newcastle United potentially sign. But it's been a great show. And yeah, lads, your thoughts before we wrap?
Just a reminder as well to that away days. It's back tomorrow. We're taking a little break from away days, but back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. So join us for that one. And yeah, we'll be back for a reaction show after the Wolves game then on Wednesday night. But once again, thanks Alex for joining us, and we will see you all on the next one. How about a bit of Isaac?
Oh, we've got to.
A bit of Isaac, right? See you there, everyone. See you in the next one.
Bye-bye.
Yes, sir.